Hello, my name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and we highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone affected. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and join us and share comments with us on Twitter at the Fortune Society SOC. Today's show is really exciting and really interesting as we're going to begin to start talking about housing discrimination against people with criminal legal system involvement. And this is entitled specifically The Case of the Fortune Society versus iAfford. And in early 2021, the Fortune Society was connected to a young man who had come from serving a prison sentence imposed when he was a teenager. And since his release, he maintained his hard-won sobriety, worked 3 jobs, built up a good credit score, and overcame lung cancer, and volunteered at a local cancer center to support other patients. He could afford the rent for a number of apartments. However, time and time again, his applications were denied. And he once quietly told the Fortune Society advocate, "I just want to give up sometimes. I just keep hearing no." Unfortunately, his story is not unique. People returning from incarceration continue to be punished in so many ways, and they struggle to find work, secure loans, gain an education, acquire needed social service benefits, and like the young man described above, many times are denied housing. Their sentences seem to never end. And the lack of a safe place to people raise their head at night makes it extremely difficult to become a successful member of society. Recognizing this problem is getting worse over time, and that landlords and brokers were becoming savvier about covering up and hiding unlawful blanket bans against people with conviction or criminal legal system involvement in violation of the Fair Chance for Housing Act law, Fortune launched the Housing Discrimination Initiative, which is entitled The Initiative. And as a part of the initiative, the Fortune Society began to more systematically track and combat potential housing discrimination against people with legal system involvement, such as the young man above. And interestingly enough, on October 28th of 2022, Fortune brought a federal lawsuit under the FHA about a particularly egregious blanket ban against people with criminal legal system involvement, which Fortune discovered in early 2021 as a result of advocacy work throughout the initiative. And so we are here today to discuss that case. And the case brought against iAfford, this kind of housing discrimination unearthed as part of Fortune's work on this case, the work of Fortune in this area, and the broader implications for society, including exacerbating the homelessness crisis and making communities less safe. And so today we have 3 guests that are joining us to really talk about this really important issue. And in this case on iAfford, we have joining us JoAnne Page. JoAnne Page serves as the president and CEO of the Fortune Society for over 34 years. And after graduation from Yale Law School, she practiced as a criminal defense lawyer with the Legal Aid Society, and then went to the Court Employment Project, which is now called in New York City Cases, and developed their felony alternative to incarceration program before joining Fortune in 1989. And under her leadership, Fortune grew from approximately 22 staff to over 500 staff, and has developed cutting-edge programs, including alternatives to incarceration and a model of housing for homeless justice impacted people from emergency through permanent supportive housing. JoAnne Page, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us here at Both Sides of the Bars.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on the show. And it's a pleasure to be able to talk about this lawsuit because I think it offers a national model.
Absolutely. And we also have Tabor Benedict just joining us as well. Tabor is a housing advocate at the Fortune Society. And in that role, he combats housing discrimination based on legal system involvement. He also advocates for people individually to help lift them up and gain access to safe homes and push for public policy changes that reduce barriers to safe, stable, and affordable housing. Tabor, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well and grateful to be here and be a part of this very important discussion.
And lastly, we have joining us Valeria D. Comenencia Ortiz, who joins us, and she's an attorney at Relman Colfax, PLLC, a civil rights law firm in Washington, D.C., And Valerie's civil rights litigation practice largely focused on challenging racial discrimination in housing, lending, and policing. Valerie, thanks so much for joining us here at both sides of the bars. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we'll jump right into it, folks. This is a really important issue. We know that the Fortune Society, in partnership with Relman Colfax, had litigated against this entity for practicing housing discrimination against someone who had a conviction history. And I want to start with you, JoAnne. Could you please discuss, how you and Fortune first started encountering housing discrimination against people with legal system involvement, and why litigation is sometimes necessary in the face of such litigation?
Well, when we first encountered housing discrimination in a kind of mind-blowing way is when we wanted to lease up Castle Gardens, which is our permanent housing. And that was about 12 years ago. And we engaged a firm that did lease up for affordable housing. And what they told us was they routinely denied anybody with a criminal conviction. And if people wanted to appeal, they could appeal, but almost nobody appeals. And I was appalled to know that this was routine practice. And Fortune took on fighting this as routine practice in the housing field, and especially in the affordable housing field. And we succeeded in having Governor Cuomo do an executive order barring such blanket discrimination for any housing, affordable housing, that was built during using government money. And we basically have taken on this housing discrimination as a key advocacy role for Fortune, because Fortune is both an advocacy and a service organization.
Yeah, and thank you for that, JoAnne. And turning to you, Taber, could you tell us a little bit about your work and how you came to first discover a discriminatory policy of iAfford?
Well, thank you very much for that question. So my work focuses on combating housing discrimination against people with legal system involvement. I myself spent time in prison, and so this cause and this work is near and dear to my heart. How I found out about iAfford is in the normal course of my work. I was advocating for someone who had been denied by 3 different landlords exclusively based on his past legal system involvement. He had the ability to pay. He had a voucher. iAfford was one of those organizations. He sought to appeal that denial. They ghosted him. I then called to find out about their policy, and in so doing found out that they had a blanket ban against anyone with past legal system involvement. And that's how this all got started.
Yeah, thank you for that, Taber. And turning to you, Valerie, right, as you think about this work and the iAfford case, could you discuss the disparate impact, right, the kind of discrimination has on Black and Latino people, and how it is as a result of violates the Fair Chance for Housing Act? And are these cases a part of the modern civil rights movement?
Yes. Well, the Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing on the basis of several protected classes, including race, national origin, and color. One of the ways to establish discrimination under the Fair Housing Act is to show that a housing provider's policy or practice that may seem to be neutral actually has a disproportionate effect on a protected group, such as Black applicants or Latinos or people with disabilities, among others. In this case, and in others like it, one of our theories of showing discrimination here was that iAfford's housing policy of blanketly excluding individuals with justice involvement was discriminatory, because given the racial disparities in the criminal legal system, really at every stage, from arrests to convictions to incarceration, Black and Latino individuals are disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system. And when you adopt a policy that blanketly excludes justice-involved individuals from housing opportunities, you are disproportionately affecting Black and Latino applicants and their families. This is compounded also by the fact that the housing opportunities that iAfford controls are affordable housing units. And so adding that on to the factors at play here, we were able to show and allege that iAfford's blanket ban disproportionately excluded Black and Latino applicants at many times the rates at which it excluded white applicants.
Yeah, and turning to you, JoAnne, what are some of the broader implications of the iAfford case for those pushing for legislative solutions for consideration by communities in New York City and elsewhere?
So we are thrilled that this was a judgment, and it is law, it is case law, it is precedent. And in fact, I'm going to be speaking at a national conference in Milwaukee this month. That is a conference of people fighting discrimination in housing. It did two things. One is the disparate impact theory that Valerie explained is affirmed by this decision. If you discriminate and do blanket discrimination against people impacted by the criminal legal system, you are having a disparate impact on people of color, and it's a violation of fair housing. The other is that we sued as an institutional plaintiff. And what this did is establish our standing. So housing is a precious and scarce commodity, especially affordable housing. And what this judgment does is establish a precedent that organizations like Fortune can sue as institutional plaintiffs, because this says that we were hurt in our mission. And so this is a broadening of who can sue to include organizations like the Fortune Society. So also, it was a whopping big judgment, $500,000. And what we are trying to do is tell landlords and apartment brokers it's a bad idea to discriminate because you can get hurt in your pocket. So this is a really great deterrence, because similar cases were settled in the tens of thousands of dollars. And this was a judgment, final judgment, for $500,000.
Yeah. And I want to pose the same question to you, Taber, and to you, Valerie, right, in terms of what are some of the broad implications of the iAfford case, relative to pushing for legislative solutions and for consideration by communities in New York City and elsewhere. Taber?
Yeah, I think it's JoAnne hit upon this a little bit. It amplifies and opens people's eyes, I think, a little bit because of the nature of it, the large size of it. And, the fact is that someone that has legal system involvement, it's not predictive of them being a bad tenant. There is a lot of different things out there that people don't even know about. The fact is that when you give people broader access to safe, stable places to live, it improves the safety of the community. And I think people through this lawsuit may wake up to some of those facts and things that they may not have considered otherwise.
Sure. Valerie?
Yes, I'll echo that as well and say one of the significant impacts of this case is to help educate housing providers and also the public in general that blanketly excluding and discriminating against justice-involved individuals is not only wrong, it's not only harmful to communities, but it's also unlawful and it may be costly. And something else I wanted to point out is that the Fair Housing Act and its protections are not a ceiling, they're a floor. And so with this case, we're also hoping to push state and local legislatures to adopt additional protections for justice-involved individuals in housing.
Yeah.
I think also, and this is tailgating on Valerie's point, I think that it moved New York City forward in acting against discrimination, because we collaborated with HPD, Housing Preservation and Development, which is the primary New York City funder of affordable housing. And they have gone further and further toward non-discrimination based on criminal legal record. And their commissioner gave a statement in our press release that put them solidly in this field. And so I think that influencing local politics is also a role model for the country.
Totally, JoAnne. And, going back to you, JoAnne, right? And, as we look back on your impressive career at the Fortune Society, like, what are your hopes, right, JoAnne, for the future in terms of housing and housing discrimination against the formerly incarcerated, right? And how, with the iAfford case, being viewed in the future. So talk to us a little bit about that, JoAnne. Again, you have this impressive career. You've been doing this work for a long time. Like, what are your hopes?
Well, I think that we've seen progress in housing discrimination protections. When I met John Relman, I did it through a presentation at the Reb Law Conference at Yale Law School many, many years ago. And what I said is there's growing protection against job discrimination for people with records, but there is absolutely no protection against housing discrimination. And his law student, his intern, was in the audience and came up to me and said, "You got to meet John Relman." And John and I talked. He came from Washington for that conversation. And we crafted the idea of using Fortune as an institutional plaintiff. And we did one successful case with $1 million settlement against Sandcastle, because that was a place that did blanket discrimination. And this is our second case, but the law has evolved very much. When we first started, no protections whatsoever. And now we are proposing fair chance for housing legislation. The HPD mandate for affordable housing and supportive housing is a low barrier policy for supportive housing. And there is legislation throughout the country that says discrimination against folks with records is violation of the fair housing law. And there's legislation being proposed and legislation passed across the country, which is advancing this. And iAfford is case law that will help in that struggle.
Sure. Tabor, any thoughts too, right, in terms of your hopes, right, consistent with JoAnne, I'm sure, and following you, Tabor, Valerie, for your thoughts?
First of all, I just want to thank you all for having this discussion, and it's a great honor to be on a discussion and a panel with JoAnne Page, who's led in this area for so long. I would say, piggybacking off of what she said, I have great hope for the future. I believe as more people realize what this issue really means, how it promotes segregation, how it's really kind of a racist policy that some of these places have, when they come to grips with that, and also the cost of the economy, it's something that I think will lead to legislation being passed in a greater number of jurisdictions, and there being more decisions in favor of this kind of justice.
Sure. And Valerie?
I completely agree. I'll just add that, of course, over the years, the means to exclude or discriminate have evolved. And of course, our strategies to challenge and address those also have to evolve. And it's really important for us to have partners like Fortune Society, who work so hard to identify, investigate, and challenge all forms of housing discrimination as they evolve and come up. And so I'm also really hopeful for the future.
And here's like my last question too. I want to frame it. Then obviously people have some thoughts to share, but we're in New York State, right? We're here in New York City in particular for most of us, and the work we do is in New York State, but also has national implications. What might you all offer, starting with you, JoAnne, to other jurisdictions and other states to start doing to address housing discrimination? What might you offer them? Just some thoughts.
You know, we have been doing some consulting in states that are much less advanced against discrimination. I think that the simple message is that housing discrimination against folks with records is a violation of the Fair Housing Act, and it subjects you to legal penalties and to cases such as the ones that we've brought. So we are saying to landlords, to brokers for affordable housing, to the private housing sector, that if you discriminate and you do it blanket, without exchange, without consideration of how far a person has come, without an individualized assessment, you are breaking the law and you're subject to penalties that will hurt you in your pocket. And I think these two judgments are part of a national message that we are really strongly giving evidence for.
Sure. Taber?
Yeah, I mean, I want to make this a little personal, if that's okay. I spent 3 years and 3 months in prison and 52 days in solitary confinement. I do not think that I make my community more dangerous, okay? I am more grateful just to have a roof over my head. I am more grateful to have the wonderful neighbors that I have on the Upper West Side. And I just want to put that out there that a lot of the people that have spent time in prison or jail would be fantastic neighbors and very grateful just to have a safe place to rest their head at night like me.
Yeah. Thank you too. And Valerie?
Yes, I couldn't put it better. I'll just add that, of course, everyone should have the right to safe and affordable housing, and the opportunity to be considered for housing opportunities. And so I'm hoping that states and municipalities will look at this very strong line of cases establishing that blanketly and indiscriminately excluding individuals with justice involvement is a fair housing violation, and look for ways to continue to push the law to continue to protect this population.
So any closing thoughts you care to share, anyone, as we have a couple of minutes left before we wrap up? JoAnne, Taber, or Valerie?
I have a closing thought. It takes a village to fight discrimination. And I think we have some exemplary examples of that village. The team that Relman and Colfax set to win the case was an exemplary one. And it's a fabulous partnership. Taber has put light years of effort and love into identifying people who discriminate so that we could take them to task. And Andre and his colleague Lily are fighting the good fight about fair chance for housing and passing legislation in New York City that takes us further. But this is an unending fight. And if people are aware of housing discrimination in New York City against folks with records, take it to Taber, because we'll look into it, and we may do a whole nother case with Relman Colfax to fight that.
Sure. Taber and Valerie. Taber, any closing comments too?
I would just say that in the movement to get new legislation passed, take a look at this case. Take a look at the discrimination that's out there. Take a look at the people that you know in your neighborhood, maybe that have family, friends, and colleagues that may have spent time in prison or jail. Don't they deserve a safe place to live? We need to pass the new laws. We need to pass and revise the existing laws. We need to really help people have a fair chance at success in the community. And that starts with having a safe place to live and then having opportunities to work. It's very simple. I just ask people to take a look at people in their community and think about that a little bit.
Sure. And Valerie?
I'll echo everything JoAnne and Taber have said, and I'll add it's been a wonderful experience to be able to work with Fortune Society and to see firsthand the incredible impact that they've had in the housing sphere, and in, again, pushing the law to challenge discrimination against the justice-involved individuals. And so I hope to be able to continue that fight with Fortune Society.
JoAnne Page, President and CEO of the Fortune Society, Taber Benedict, Housing Advocate at the Fortune Society, and Valeria Comenencia Ortiz from Relman Colfax. Thank you all so much for joining us here today at both sides of the bars. And we thank you, the viewers, for joining us for this very thought-provoking conversation. And in the meantime, right, on behalf of the Fortune Society, we'd like to thank you very much for tuning in today on both sides of the bars. And if you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org. That's fortunesociety.org. Or you can go on Facebook and type in the Fortune Society. My name is Andre Ward, and as always, we appreciate you as we take a critical look at both sides of the bars. Be well.
If you want to know how to reduce crime in America, in New York City, you do it one person at a time, creating an environment that celebrates the human spirit. Recidivism is a result of societal failure to do that, and Fortune has demonstrated that lives can change.
I tell people all the time, this is where I grew up. This is where I learned what being a man is and what being a productive citizen means.
It is the work of this great organization that has helped to shape my ideas, drive my conviction, and further deepen my commitment to the cause.
For more than half a century, you have amplified the voices of those who are impacted by unfair policies and helped thousands of justice-involved people transform their lives. You have led by example to show how we can help formerly incarcerated individuals come home, rebuild their lives, and contribute to our communities.
It's never about the contract or the milestones first. It's always about the individual. These individuals were literally suffering in incarceration because they just didn't have an address to go to. And for them to walk into a place where it's about them and only them and what they need and only what they need